Fatma Mili is a computer scientist and has held several leadership positions in higher education and is about to start as the Interim Dean of the College of Humanities and Social Sciences at Montclair State University. Fatma, thank you so much for taking the time today.
Good morning, Joe, and thank you for having me.
So, to start, I'd like to ask you, you've written about higher education's social responsibility. Could you tell the audience a little bit about how you view the role of higher education in society?
Thank you. Yes, so higher education is really the institution for human development, and I like to add also humanity development, because it's not just impacting the individual, it's really impacting society. So at the individual level, in terms of human development, higher education and education in general, its purpose, its mission is to expand humans' intellectual, emotional, action horizons. Um, and I will keep coming back to this because in many ways we have shrunk the mission of higher education by reducing it to you get a higher education to get a job. Getting a job is a byproduct of education. But I think it's reductive to say education is for a job. And in many, I love the description of Foster Wallace of the purpose of liberal education, actually. And in his This Is Water commencement speech, he says, very often we say liberal education teaches you to think. In fact, that's not what it is. And I generalize it to education. Education teaches us to think, to choose about what to think about. And that's really what expanding our horizons. And what he's referring to is our initial impulse is to be always thinking about me now. An educated person will be stretching the boundaries of what they think about and thinking about more than themselves, thinking about more than the now. And that takes more empathy, that takes more knowledge, that takes more sensitivity, etc. So an educated person is a person who knows more, who understands more, and who chooses to think about more important things more frequently.
Hmm.
So that's at the individual level. In terms of humanity development, the impact of higher education on society, why is it that it's important to have higher education institutions within a community, within a country, this institution really has maybe one of the biggest impact on who we are. They define the ethnosphere of society. They define the sum of the ideas, the dreams, the imagination, the expectation, the social contracts. All of that is really something that is generated, stimulated, constantly questioned by higher education institutions. Higher education institutions force us to constantly be reflecting on who we are, what we do, and constantly forcing us to expand the adjacent possible. By expanding, we're constantly making the next step possible. So the higher education institutions is really the intellectual institution by excellence. It's not the only one, but your question about impacting society, changing society, it's not the only institution that is there to rethink what we do, who we are, but it's one that is uniquely positioned to do that for many different reasons. There is no other institution that has the depth and the breadth of expertise that universities have. No other institution has the expert in sociology, in physics, in philosophy, in biology, etc., all within the same walls. No other institution has the diversity of thinking and the diversity of views that universities have. You take any other institution, usually there is a level of uniformity. Universities, at least ideally, do not have that, should not have that. The other thing is universities are designed for the long view. We think long term. They have frequently, the refrain is higher educations don't change. Some of that is a virtue. Yes, some of it is, we could be changing a bit faster, but some of it by design, it's an institution that is thinking long term. And that has a high level of risk tolerance. There is no other institution where your job can be working on something that may fail over 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, yet you keep working on it and you're not penalized for that. And in many respects, that's what tenure is for. Tenure is there to protect the freedom of expression, but the freedom of thinking and the freedom to fail, the freedom to try different things, because all of these are necessary for long-term thinking. All of these are necessary for addressing the grandest challenges that society faces. And maybe the last element that makes higher education institutions uniquely positioned to do this is their focus on future generations. We're constantly surrounded by 18-year-olds and 19-year-olds and 20 years old, and they force us to reckon with the future, their future. We cannot be just thinking about the next 10 years. We know that they are interested in the next 50 years, 100 years. And at a time where most of our problems are generated by our lack of long-term view, that is a very important component. So all of this makes, obviously, I'm really passionate about higher education. I think it's a great institution. I think it's a great institution that is worth preserving, saving, nurturing, because it has a very important role, and it has many virtues that are worth preserving and protecting.
Yeah. Well, I want to ask you more about that and drill down a little bit more. What do you think is the role of STEM education, particularly in higher education, in addressing wicked problems, and how are we doing with that?
Thank you. So when we look back at the progress that we have made in the last, and you can take any time frame you want. You can start from post-World War II, but you look at the last 300 years, it's nothing short of miraculous, the amount of progress that humanity has made. And we expanded life expectancy, improved living conditions, the level of literacy, the mortality at birth, the level of violence, our expectations of the social norms have tremendously changed. Now, some of these are not STEM, but most of the progress that has been made was stimulated by science and technology. At the same time, we seem to have hit a fork in this progress. We are realizing now, or we are now at a point where we are generating outcomes that none of us want. We are destroying the physical and the biological environment that is necessary to our survival. We can talk about the extinction of many species, about the global warming, about the depletion of many of the resources. All of that is the byproduct of our progress in science and technology. And another challenge, another wicked problem, which I see them as really interrelated, is the wealth gap that we are generating. And when we talk about wealth, you can think of it as physical resources, but also a gap in all kinds of what is possible for different human beings on Earth today. And it's a gap that is intolerable. It goes against every value we espouse and declare that we value this. In reality, the growing gap is really an impediment to progress. And it's this gap that has generated the depletion of resources to begin with, and the depletion of resources is further aggravating the gap. So the problem is science the problem or the solution? And it is both. And I know we have many optimists who technology optimists who think science has always saved us, it will save us again, and waiting for some miraculous technology or science that will allow us to reverse all of the damage we have done on this planet. I don't believe that. I think our science, technology, most of our education have all been built, designed for another time, by another time. They all have underlying assumptions. They all have underlying paradigms. They were all designed around some approximations that made lots of sense when they were made, but that are no longer valid. And research has negated these assumptions, has negated these paradigms, but somehow education has not caught up yet. Herman Daly, who is an economist, describes talking about the field of economics, says economics was designed for an empty world. Now we are in a full world. And he's talking about our approximation of a number of resources where they were designed post-World War II, where you could, as there is the gap between the need and the available quantities was such that you can just assume they're infinite and never worry about that. That's the empty world. That is no longer the case. We have used so much of these resources, and there are so many of us doing that it becomes just a contradiction to assume that we are in an empty world. And you can look at I think it's the same concept. You see it manifest in engineering, in almost every discipline in engineering. It's similar paradigms also appear in biology, where we still think in terms of survival of the fittest, in terms of everything in the natural world is competition. That is not true. Any biologist, researcher would tell you that is not true. That's not what the current research says. Yet, you look at our textbooks, the education, the way we are forming students in future generation, we are hammering these same paradigms in their mindsets, that it's all survival of the fittest, it's all competition, there are a number of things that we can ignore, that we can assume infinite. I'll give a couple of examples. Actually, I'll give two examples from engineering, and engineering and computing. So there is there is a template that is used to describe what innovation is. How do you innovate? How do you create a new product? And there's this very simple template with 3 circles. When you come up with a new product, first it has to be desirable. So there has to be some people who want that. It has to be technically feasible. So you have to have the science to actually be able to solve that problem. And the third circle is it has to be viable. And the viability refers to the commercial production and viability, which to me, it's just always takes me by, I always find it shocking that are these the 3 most important things. Now, many revisions of this add, is this right to do? There's this old adage for engineers, why do you do this? And the answer is, we do it because we can. And the revision is, we shouldn't do anything just because we can. We should be paying very careful attention to, yes, I can do this, but should I? So how your question was about engineering education. And my point is, these paradigms of resources are infinite. This is the scope of our concern. I don't worry about where do the resources come from, what does their extraction impact, who does their extraction impact, not to worry about what happens to the product once I'm done using it. So all of the post usage is something that that is not part of the life cycle of what an engineer is concerned about. And another thing that I wanted to mention, and the absence of this concern of who is really financing this project, who pays for it, who is impacted by it. Again, the way this is embedded in how we form engineers, how we educate engineers. Every engineering students from Engineering 101, they have everything that they design. There is a form that they fill out. And that's how we create their habits of mind. Here are the things that you think about. And in that form, we have the desirability, the feasibility, and the viability, period. So that really creates the reflexes of an engineer. And then they graduate and we tell them, here's the problem, how to now address this problem. Well, we shape them to create the problem. So again, to address your question of how is STEM education contributing to it? STEM education, yes, is core to addressing the wicked problems, but it needs to really transform from the inside. There is another story told by botanist, Native American botanist Kimmer, that I find very symptomatic of the way we condition our students to think. So she tells of this young man engineer who goes and spends a summer with with an Ojibwe family who are collecting who are rising families. So he spends the days with them where they go in the morning and they have some way of collecting the rice, and at the end of the day he looks and figures they're really wasting. There's a lot of rice wasted that they're not collecting. So at the end of his stay, as a gift to them, he designs a way for them to collect much more of the rice. So he presents this to them. He says, with this, you will be collecting 85% more of the rice. They listen to him very politely, and then they ask, but why? We don't need more than what we are collecting. and the rice that stays in the water reseeds itself. And the rice that stays is for the ducks who come to feed in the fish. There's a whole, they don't say it in this way, but there's a whole ecosystem that goes around that. And plus their Kimmerer emphasizes many of the values that Native Americans have, which is never take more than half, never take the last one, etc. But to me, it really is symptomatic of our obsession with optimization in engineering. We're always optimizing, maximizing, and without much thought of when we're optimizing this quantity, it's at the expense of what?
Yeah.
We don't necessarily step back enough to think, okay, I'm maximizing here, but what am I losing? What is the bigger picture here? So again, I think STEM education has a huge role to play, but it really needs some real soul searching and examination of what is hidden, what is buried in the way we are doing things that we need to re-examine, that we need to change in order for us to be in a position to address the wicked problems.
Yeah. Well, I also want to ask you about how computing education and STEM education also, how has computing education and STEM education changed in recent years, or has it?
Excellent question. Yes and no. Yes, there are some amazing people doing amazing things, but is that the vast majority? Not yet. It's not done in a systemic fashion. And I'm thinking of the work of Batya Freedom and David Hendry from the University of Washington. They came up with the notion of value-sensitive design. And they're computer scientists, and I love their work because when you think of the impact of computer systems that we deploy in the world, and we think they had negative impact that we could not have thought about. So if again, I go back to those three circles and saying we have to add a fourth circle to say what's the impact. In engineering, it may be relatively easy to do. In computing, it's a little bit harder because the things that we produce are so malleable, are so multi-use, that yes, I may have designed this for a very noble purpose, but then see how it has been used. Take the example of Facebook and its impact on election, for instance, and how suddenly inserting these algorithms that says maximize engagement, and to maximize engagement, you have to maximize outrage, and to maximize outrage, put the most outlandish things, and these are the ones that end up being reproduced. So yeah, Facebook was a project that emerged out of a very non-threatening purpose, but then it has evolved in ways that nobody could have predicted, and with lots of damaging impact. When I was the Dean of the College of Computing at UNC Charlotte, and this was right post election 2016, where there was lots of conversations and reflections about the impact of social media on our democracy and how do we protect against that. And we did, as a college, we adopted three values. One of them is we take responsibility for the social impact of everything we do. And it was an important step for us. we have reflected that in our strategic plan, in how we do education, how we do recruitment, how we do mentoring, how we do research. But also we were very much aware of the fact that whatever we do is relatively limited in the sense that, again, yeah, I may have done everything right, yet still generate these problems. And this is why the value-sensitive design, these researchers have taken time and have developed a relatively sophisticated template about how do we think about our systems. And they take multiple dimensions, the time dimension. This is what it does today. What could it possibly, how could it possibly evolve? I'm designing it for this group of users. What if this group of users hands it over to other users? I'm designing it with these assumptions of abilities and capabilities. What is its impact on others? So they really have they have created a set of cards and a set of questions for designers to think about. That goes a long way. It won't address all the problems, but I think it gets us started into here is how we think about what we design. Values is an important component. What value is embedded in this technology? There is no such thing as value neutral technology. Every technology has value embedded in it. It's important to understand it, to see it, to discern it, to make it visible. And also that way, as society's values evolve as well, we can see at what point is there a problem here? So yeah, the answer to this question, there is change. It's not systemic yet, in the sense that not everybody has said, here's how we do education now, here's how we do engineering education. But there are several researchers who have written about engineering, ethical engineering, who have designed ways of thinking about the impact of the engineering that we create, the engineering products that we create.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned UNC Charlotte and the when we were talking earlier through email, you mentioned that they decided to forego accreditation. Could you talk about that to innovate and kind of the background there?
So I at the introduction, I said higher education sometimes doesn't evolve fast enough. When I talk about accreditation here for the College of Computing and Informatics at UNC Charlotte, it's not the accreditation of the university, but the professional accreditation of that program. And professional organizations set some criteria, and then for 4 or 5 years, every program who wants to be accredited has to meet those criteria. UNC Charlotte, before I joined, my colleagues there said, we don't want to be accredited because we don't want to always be looking back and say, what did they decide 4 years ago? We want to have the freedom of making our own decisions and say, okay, I don't necessarily want to let's say the ABET accreditation, the CAC accreditation says everybody has to take calculus too. If we decide actually we'd rather do something else, we would like the freedom to do that. So I'm not necessarily against accreditation, but sometimes if you want to innovate, it's good to feel confident enough to say, no, thank you. I'm going to do it differently.
Yeah. Well, I also wanted to ask you about the kind of public's view of universities and, like the declining trust that the public has in university. Doesn't it make sense to hold them accountable for the ROI of a university degree. How do you think about that?
Um, there definitely has been an orchestrated campaign against higher education. It has become much more intense, much more obvious recently. I don't say that, I'm not claiming that there is no room for improvement in the way we do higher education. But I get very nervous we when we reduce what higher education is about, and when the institution gets on the defensive, and as a result contributes to that reduction in mission. So the metrics that have been put on higher education, for instance, is what is the return on investment for students and their families? You pay this much in tuition. What is the impact 5 years later and 10 years later? And the reality is, it is still the most it's one of the best investments. Report after report shows that yes, overall, students have better wages throughout life. They have better lives. They have better health, etc., etc. So higher education definitely has a huge positive impact on almost every single student who enrolls in higher education. The metrics that were set starting from the Obama administration was, we're going to measure how many students actually graduate in 6 years, how many graduate in 4 years, and also the earning wages of students. The metrics in themselves are not necessarily a bad thing, but what you measure ends up being what you invest in. And that's where I'm concerned about, in the sense that we're suddenly equating the mission of higher education to be getting jobs to students. Yes, getting a job is important, especially for students who come from families where they don't have wealth to support them. Yes, of course, that is important. But that is not the sole mission of higher education. And reducing it becomes very dangerous, in the sense that suddenly we question, so why do you do research? Does that contribute to my son or my daughter's getting a job? If he doesn't, then I don't want to contribute to it. So there is that shrinking of the mission of universities from the public view. And also, I think we haven't done a good job at explaining what we are about and explaining why we do have a positive impact on individuals, on society, and how, yes, getting a job is important. It's something that we work towards. The success of students, of course, it's important. The retention of students is important. The graduation of students is important, but it cannot be the only metric. It cannot be the main metric with which universities are measured. I think there is a huge danger in that.
Yeah. Well, so do you think that higher education institutions are ready to embrace their higher purpose and evolve in a way that they need to in order to evolve to address environmental degradation and social inequity?
Um, are they ready? I I'm watching everything that's happening in the news, and seeing how sometimes a crisis is the best thing that can happen, in the sense that it really forces us to reckon with is this really what we are about? And is this our responsibility? And very often when we discuss, so some universities tend to be, so Harvard is prominent in the news. And I'm glad that they are taking the lead. And one of the changes that they have made is you look at the Harvard website, they did an excellent job at explaining to the public, here's what we do, here's what we are. And generally, for some weird reason, higher education have not been very effective at communicating what they do. So that's, again, that's something that is positive there. The other part of my answer is when we look at the higher education institution, there are the elite institutions that have a specific purpose, and they have a very special place in the higher institution in general. But the majority of students are really educated in the middle of universities. And I'm thinking, of course, I'm very excited about Montclair State University now, and looking at all of the amazing things that they do. It is a Hispanic serving institution, and I'm very interested in and reflecting on what that means and the impact of that and how it changes our thinking. When you are a selective university, you're focusing on making sure that the student fits in your very narrow profile of what does a successful student look like. And maybe only 1% or 0.5% of the students fit that, and you're focused on finding that student and accepting them. When you are a true public university for service, the mindset is completely different. The students who don't fit that 0.5% mold are not students who don't fit, but students who bring so much more. And your mindset is in discovering and celebrating what these students bring to the picture. If anything is going to transform higher education, it's these institutions in the middle who embrace their mission, who embrace their role as human development, what we have started with, in its totality, who embrace the assets, the qualities that these students who are not accepted elsewhere, but have so much to offer, have so much excitement, have so much potential, and build around that. I think that's what will change higher education, because serving these students is addressing inequity. Serving these students is understanding what they're concerned about and addressing sustainability. In contrast with HBCU, higher Hispanic serving institutions tend to be much more diverse than any other institution. So they're classified as Hispanic serving by the percentage of Hispanic, but their mission, the way they're designed, the way they are truly, authentically HSI is by embracing that whole diversity and serving that diversity.
Yeah. Well, so I wanted to ask you one more question about kind of the future. Where does AI fit in to all this, and what will be the impact of AI?
Amazing that we talked all of this time and didn't bring this topic yet. Obviously, there is a lot to say here. Everything that we have said about designing ethical design and designing systems that don't do harm don't magnify inequity in society is 10 times more relevant as we look at AI, because these systems tend to be even more opaque than other systems. So the impact of AI systems, and especially systems that have this high level of generosity, is extremely important. It needs to be addressed. And this is why actually I was very excited to join the College of Humanities and Social Sciences. I think I have always been a believer in the interplay between the different disciplines. And the ABET accreditation, for instance, for engineering says you do engineering here, and then we send our students for a 3-credit ethics course, and then we check the box ethics in engineering. That it doesn't work that way. It really has to be hand in hand. And the regulation of engineering products, the regulation of AI, the understanding, the formulating of what the questions are, of the understanding of what the impact is, really needs all of the skills and the expertise from the humanities. So I'm really looking forward to that. So there is that aspect, the ethical aspect, that definitely needs to be addressed, and we need to do much, much more in understanding and in regulating these AI systems. The other facet of that is back to universities for jobs. And the worry that many of the jobs that we currently do, AI systems will be able to do. Again, provided they do them ethically, provided they do them in line with our values, I think that's fine. The loss of jobs, and I'll take 2 minutes here on the notion of everybody has to have a job. That is one of the things that, one of the paradigms that we assume it's a universal truth. Does every human being need to have a paid job to live? We have the technology, we have the resources actually to feed every single person. So the system that we have designed works that way. Is it the only way? No. And this is where the role of universities is to expand our atmosphere, to question models, etc. And I get very often one of the metrics of universities is social mobility. I don't like that notion of social mobility, because instead of questioning the fact that scale that we have created, all we want to do is to take a person here, place them there. So it's embracing that model and then playing the game in it. No, we should be questioning that model and say, does it really have to be that way? The same thing, it's what is education for? If education is for human development, yes, we will still need education, even though most of the jobs will be done by robots and AI systems. That's fine, provided they are regulated, provided they have the rail guards to make sure that they do things in line with our values, in line with our principles, etc. So it's a huge program. There's a lot to do. So, but I wanted to distinguish between where the fears are. Yes, they can do lots of harm. Yes, they can institutionalize many of the inequities that we already have, and strengthen them and hide them. And that's a huge danger. But as far as because they write so well, students no longer need to write, I think that's nonsense. I can travel very fast, yet I still love to run. It's not because I need to transport myself, but because it's healthy for me. So, that's the same thing. We still need to write, to communicate, to think, because that's what a human being does, not because that's what I need to do to get a salary.
Yeah. Well, Fatma, thank you so much for taking the time to share your insights and your work and your research. And I hope we can continue the conversation down the road.
Thank you so much. Great questions, and I appreciate the invitation.